This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. A semi-flat felled seam is probably the most popular seam for professional-looking canvas projects, including covers, bimini tops, dodgers, and even upholstery seating. This is umbrella marine grade fabric that we will use to sample this seam construction. Using a soapstone pencil, we mark the cut line and then our seam allowance lines, a 1/2 inch on one side and a 1/2 inch on the other. The marks from a soapstone pencil will come off eventually in time in the weather when they get wet. To cut the fabric, we're going to use the Sailrite Edge Hotknife. This will prevent the edges, which will be on the underside of the semi-flat felled seam, from unraveling. Seam stick or double-sided tape is often used to baste panels together prior to sewing. Here we are using seam stick for canvas in a 3/8 inch width. Not only does it help hold panels in place, but if you sew through it, it can reduce water leaking through needle holes, making the seam more water resistant, and it reduces puckering issues when sewing. Remove the transfer paper and that reveals the double-sided tape. If your fabric has an outside surface, those outside surfaces must face each other as you baste these panels together directly on top of themselves. The edges that are cut with a hot knife need to be exactly lined up on top of each other. Then we use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to apply pressure to the basting tape so those panels hold together well. We're going to use the deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide and position it a 1/2 inch away from the needle. Then we're going to create a straight stitch, doing some reversing at the beginning and the end of our sewing to lock our stitch in place. The deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide really acts like a fence on a table saw, keeping the fabric a consistent distance from the needle. It is important when creating this first stitch that you do not sew through the double-sided tape that you basted that edge with. If you sew into the double-sided tape, when you splay the panel apart, you'll see the glue. This is the first stitch of the semi-flat felled seam. The next step is to open up the panel so outside surfaces are facing up. Then we want to pull on the left panel and the right panel so that the fabric is splayed out on that first stitch. You can use a heavy object like the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler and actually crease the fabric there if you like. In preparation for the second and final stitch, we want to pay attention to where the 1/2 inch tail is on the underside. It can lay on the right side or the left side, depending on how you want this semi-flat felled seam to be made. We're going to lay it on the right side. So we're going to create our top stitch in the right panel about a 1/8 inch away from the first stitch. And we also want to pull on the fabric both left and right as we create this top stitch. The properties of the semi-flat felled seam are that it's nearly waterproof. It's an exceptionally strong seam, equaling about 95% of the strength of the fabric. One stitch is hidden from the sun, so even if the top stitch fails in the elements, the second usually does not. If your seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, as ours is, it will use up double that amount of fabric. So for us, 1 inch overall. Why is this one of the most popular seams for canvas work? Well, the top stitch looks great on the top side. Now, on the bottom side, it does not look as nice. There'll be 2 stitches and also a 1/2 inch tail on the underside. But it is still the most popular seam in the canvas market. To see more videos on seam construction, click one of the video links here, or click the links in the YouTube description.